Good evening and welcome to Nycos Nightly News. And tonight in particular, we are going to be carrying on a conversation about something we haven't talked about a lot in the realm of Nycos, and that is the life forms that are here. And we utilize this special report format calling it Creature Feature. I happen to have liked that term for a series of movies that I watched when I was a child in the let's say a middle America horror genre, but I still like the word creature feature. And we're going to be utilizing that to describe a variety of creatures in the world of Nycos, 2 or 3 at a time, generally speaking, to give you a kind of a heads up or a better understanding of what the players that are running in the game deal with on a day-to-day basis. So this series of episodes that will be dealing with the creatures and beings of Nycos is, of course, part of Nycos RPG and, in particular, part of the Game Master's Guide series. And this is a recommendation, perhaps, of a couple of creatures that you might use in your own campaigns. Feel free, of course, to adapt them, modify them as you see fit. The rules in the actual game, Nycos RPG, do not define them in any particular way, although there may eventually be a monster book like every other game that's out there. But generally speaking, we leave this to the theater of the mind, and so I won't be putting any images up. I know that's probably going to be one of the greatest detractions from this video, is that it'll be more discussion than it will be visualization. So just wanted you to be aware of that. If you like what you've seen or would like to know more, make sure you hit all the buttons down below, subscribe, like, follow, and all of that. It helps to let the world know that you're an interested part of the audience, and it provides you with access to the new information every time I do a new video. All right, so tonight we're going to talk about 3 of the species of Nycos. And when we speak of these being types, in the first case, we're going to be speaking in a general way of a class, I guess you would call it, of creatures that don't have specific names defined for them, although colloquially they will be using, folk might use other specific names, but we'll get into that. Second will be the Rachnos, which is a creature type that comes from the secondary plane of Nycos known as the Everdark, and it does, for the most part, exist beneath the surface of the standard world of Nycos, but these beings are just now starting to make their presence known in the area that they call the Undersky, the traditional primary world of Nycos. And so we'll be talking about them. And then finally, we're going to talk about arguably one of the most ancient enemies of life on Nycos, and that is the species known as the Yarlum. And we'll be doing a great amount of detail on that because we have reports coming to us specifically from Prosamon, one of the elite players in the world of Nycos, who has actually done a biological analysis of them, and I think you'll find that quite entertaining. So that will, of course, be coming up later in the video, so make sure you stay tuned. Okay, so first we're going to talk about the Urgluk, and the word Urgluk really fundamentally to the population of Nycos means terrifying man monster. These are beings who share characteristic traits with mortals, with men, and with Eldrin and the other species, in that they are bipedal, have opposable thumbs, are generally in size about double the size of a human in terms of their physical height, their dimension, their weight, and so on. And they do have one thing that, all the Urgluk share a unanimous desire for human flesh as a food source. So these are manhunters. And the Urgluk, when we speak of where they are found, they are fundamentally ubiquitous. They are in every clime, every environment, every biome, whatever, however you want to determine how you want to slice Nycos, you will find Urglic there in some fashion. They vary in description, most often colloquially associating with one of the subtypes or another, but the word Urglic ends up being the unifying term for all of them. In, for example, tropical or near tropical areas, they generally will have a greenish or gray decaying appearance. They will sometimes evince kind of a slimy skin characteristic, suggested that they might be actually biologically connected to the environment directly, and therefore the thematic appearance of them is much more of something that has is already in the process of dying, and so therefore the Urglic are a terrifying way to go, because to be eaten by something that's already on the way to decomposition is a frightening thing. The jungle or the deeper versions, warmer climate versions of them tend to be more stealthy, tend to utilize deadfalls and traps to capture their prey, and are technically cowardly hunters because they don't necessarily tend to attack civilizations. Instead, they go after lone travelers, small, and I mean 2 or 3 wagon or 2 or 3 beast of burden forms of caravans and the like. They are said to be conversant. There are those who have claimed to have spoken to Urglic in these areas, and one of the interesting notes is that there are very few things that will cause fear in an Urglic, because they are usually the alpha in their environment. But in these tropical regimes and in places particularly with large bodies of water, whether it be moors or peat bogs or whatever, the Urglic there tend to have a natural fear of goats. The Capernarian species of Secgen, the goat folk, tend to actually like to hunt the Urglic whenever they get a chance, and so you will find Capernarian hunters who specialize in taking out these humanoid monsters. Now, as you move into cooler climes and less moist environments, in for example, hilly terrain and such, they tend to manifest a more hairy personification. As a matter of fact, many of them are completely covered with a glossy fur, and although they are known to wear clothing from time to time, usually subject pieces of clothing. For example, they might wear an apron or a vest or something. Generally speaking, the Urglic are comfortable in the climate in their all-togethers, and it's an interesting note also that there are not known to be many female Urglic. They do not manifest a masculine or feminine appearance other than just to be merely monstrous, but there are those that are distinctly of a feminine nature, and in many ways they tend to take on appearances more like the concept of the hag species, which we will talk about in a later video. But these Urglic tend to be very proud creatures. Surprisingly, they have fairly decent hygiene, and it's only a rare Urglic that will have, for example, a natural bestial aroma or anything like that. Generally, they are more tidy. In some ways, they are akin to feline species because of that, and they also, when they are in this in the more temperate climes, they do tend to be more social hunters, and so they will work in groups and packs, and utilizing pack tactics will, for example, on occasion, hazard an attack on a community as a group. And when they do so, it is more akin to, for example, raiding or almost like a sabotage fashion. They tend to try to reduce the effectiveness of those that might come after them. And so, especially if there is an area where there are considerable Caprinarian hunting groups, the Urglik tend to be more aggressive and specifically targeting to moderate to large groups, especially if they can find them in cases of disarray. They tend to work very well together, and their senses, both auditory and visual, are exceptional, so they tend to be really good at their job, which makes hunting a pack of angry Urglik rather a difficult thing to do. When you move further into mountainous terrain or more northerly climates, you will find that their fur will be of a lighter or even a white color, and so therefore they are soft. They are, in a way, they fit the niche in the world of Nycos that, for example, the mythological Yeti would. Pardon me. I have to get something to drink because I got a bit of a raspy throat. So give me a second, please. At any rate, these Urglik in the northern climes tend to be actually adversarial to the other giantish creatures of Nycos, most notably the groups known as the Ordnung and of the Golians. Golians are the nearest relations, I suppose you would say, to mortals among the giant population, and they tend to be much more civilized and careful about dealing with mortals, even choosing to share living areas and such. And it was from the Golians that the mortal population developed the concept of a court process. Of course, it's considerably different than it would be on Terra in that they utilize martial combat as their final arbiter of justice, but they do so utilizing a court system, prosecutors and defense attorneys. In particular, they're known as attorneys at brawl or judicial combatants, and they actually fight out their cases physically and making their points, counterpoints, and objections physically. And so it's a considerably different judicial system, but it's the Golians that brought that to humanity. In opposition to that, of course, there are the Ordnung, and the Ordnung, we will do an entire episode on them at a later point, but they are the established and more recognizable forms and types of the giant population. Well, these are the prey of the mountain Urglik. The mountain Urglik, one major manifestation is that generally the mountain Urglik are the only ones who actually grow horns, just as other mammalian creatures in the higher climes and colder environments tend to grow them as a way of establishing their might in mating rituals and such. In this case, the Urglik's horns generally will take the appearance of ram's horns and grow in a circular pattern around their ears, but that's not always the case. So it's, again, because of the wide variety of Urglik, the mountain Urglik are those that have this physical appearance, and they tend to be very isolated. They tend to hunt singularly, and although they do tend to hunt those of the giant kind, they would not turn down a meal of mere mortals as well. So there are situations where the Urglik can be problematic because they may overpopulate. They are not, although they are fundamentally sentient, these mountain Urglik in particular are a little bit more aggressive and a little bit less communicative than the other types. So now we're going to switch and talk about a different species altogether. These are beings that are beginning to make the transit from the plane of the Everdark into the undersky world of Nycos, and they are fundamentally spider centaurs. To oversimplify a bit, they do have body structure akin to traditional wolf spiders, although they tend to be all black in coloration, and their body is as normal for an arachnid, primarily an abdomen and a thorax, but the fundamental abdomen is actually canted at about a 90-degree angle, so that their primary forelegs act effectively more for them as hands, and they tend to have 4 digits each, and 2 of them are fundamentally thumbs, so on each hand. So what would be the equivalent of their ring finger would be a second thumb. So because of that great grouping ability, they do utilize rudimentary weapons. They are not as developed in terms of technology or even mentally to the point of sophistication, but they nonetheless do use bows and other ranged weapons, as well as clubs and spears, and when they can get them, swords. But the Arachnus as a being species tends to spend its entirety of life underground, and for that reason many of them are functionally blind on the surface. Now, their other senses tend to help compensate for that, and they do have a form of echolocation in terms of a clicking and scratching sound that they emit, which allows them to navigate in the Everdark because they can sense where the walls are. But in the undersky, they tend to be a little bit more lost because they ironically do better in a city environment than they do in the wilderness because of that echolocation capability. They have a hard time differentiating individual trees. For this reason, generally the Arachnus don't prefer to be on the surface, but it has become known that they are having a problem with a daemon incursion of their own, and while they have begun to share information with the adventuring parties of Nycos called the Enjoined, and also with local populations, their lack of direct linguistics capability, they can't actually speak in the common tongue. They have a difficulty in conveying information, and quite often are seen as monstrous. Now, they are carnivorous. They do tend to prefer chattel animals. They are somehow aware of the mortality, the sentience, and the awareness of the different species. So they tend to hold back from actually killing the mortals that they do run into, or the individual they do run into, although they have the capability and on occasion will, when they think they are to the point of needing to defend themselves. They operate under a leader in almost a hive-like way. They refer to their community leader as the brood mother, and their ranges are basically at this point really unknown, although they have been identified in both the eastern and western continents and in more than one of the climates. So it's possible they could be as expansive as other forms of life within the Everdark, but they're just recently been recovered. There's more information for this, by the way, in our Nycos nightly news reports on Tuesdays, as the parties have just started to engage with the Arachnos. So more information for you there. All right, and so this last section we're going to be referring extensively to a document that was provided to us by Prosman, one of the let's see here. Gotta open the paper. Open the document. It's not where it's at. Looking in the wrong place. Haha. Give me a second here. If you are a member of Nycos RPG, or rather a member of the Nycos community through our Patreon, you would have access to our Discord channel and thereby be able to gather this information directly through our news reports. But having said that, I want to explain this report is coming to you through Prozelin, a lore master who is a sect gen. In particular, he is a Bothrican Nerdlu, which means he's a frog person. And he is the first, I guess you would call it, biologist of Nycos in a scientific term basis. We have plenty of people who are advocates for life and such, but this is the first person who's actually approaching a species from a biological standpoint. In the last couple of weeks, they've successfully taken down one of these Yarloom, as he calls them, and we will be utilizing his name as he is the person who has put the definition to pen. And this document that I'm going to be fundamentally reading from is coming from the Raven News Network. One of the advantages of being a role player in a Nycos RPG game is that all sessions are contemporaneous with all other sessions, and so therefore the groups can communicate with one another through the Raven News Network. And so he has graciously posted his report so that we can share this information between players and you, the viewers, but also to provide information to other groups should they come in contact with the Yarloon and start to put some dampers on their population. It's known that there are exactly 1,000, or were, I should say, were exactly 1,000 of these species members, and apparently that is their external cap. They do not have any above that. We don't have any information about their breeding potential. We don't know about their biological processes at all. We don't only able to operate off of this basically I guess I'm trying to think of the nice way to call it. It's a post-mortem analysis. So they're basically performing a after-action report on the death of the individual. In particular, the species, the one that they are referring to is an adult. Of course, they are not aware of any any means or method by which there might be more of them, but there is one in particular at this point that is dead. The deceased was at the time wearing robes of some sort that were of a pale green color that were burned away by the explosion. Furthermore, the subject's eyes were destroyed. They were multifaceted lenses individually that collectively created the eye feature, and they were apparently explosively compressed by the explosion, creating a kind of a cauliflower effect. Now, I'm going to be using terminology that's perhaps a little bit more scientific than normal because I'm reading this from a scientific report. The subject also seemed to be wearing some sort of utility belt which contained vials, which their contents has been deemed classified by the adventure group Strangers in a Strange Land. For more information, you can contact them via the game at Board Game Paradise on Monday nights at 6 p.m. The body of the Arlem is an insectoid, a true hexapod with clearly defined head, thorax, and abdomen. It doesn't have a dedicated apparent lung system or classic muscles, and therefore breathes by ingesting air through spiracles located along its limbs, thorax, and abdomen. As such, they are particularly vulnerable to gas attacks that might be poisonous. This is a conjecture, as this has not yet been attempted on them, but it is known that most insects detest and avoid smoke, and so perhaps the Yarlum might also be susceptible to this difficulty. The upper or forward appendages or legs actually end in three-fingered hands, and each of the hands is triple jointed and opposable. So it's as if the animal has fundamentally three thumbs. And the ability, therefore, to grip and hold and handle all sorts of tools, even some more precise and arcane in their appearance compared to human or mortal devices. Each hand, furthermore, has a muscle-controlled sphincter in the middle of its palm, and this does have an indentation that suggests something might be projected from it, but there were no evidences of the use of these by the individual, and there was not time nor tools to provide a deeper examination of that facet. Their mid legs are also interesting in that the mid pair do not have hands at all, or at any rate the end of the appendage is a tube, and there seems to be also again something that might be expended from those tubes. They are roughly the size of what has already been determined to be some sort of projectile weapon, but whether or not that is the case yet has to be known, because they've not yet been able to perform the rest of the autopsy on that. The bottom pair of legs actually has an extendable fourth joint, similar to a human's structure, but inverted, almost like that of prey animals. It suggests the ancestry was that this creature originally walked on all 6 legs, but now has developed a balanced structure that can operate on 2. But that last segment of the leg actually folds forward against the front of the leg in most circumstances, but could be extended to give the animal the ability for an extremely powerful leap. The idea is that they're capable in certain circumstances to travel very fast on those 2 legs, covering considerable amounts of distance and the elasticity of that last joint suggests that it would be more of a bounding or leaping process of travel. Now, I realize I'm going into a lot of detail on this one, but if you are a fan of the world of Nycos, you need to have this information so that you have a better visualization. As I've said before, I tend to play in a theater of the mind environment so that the players can create for themselves the image of what they think they're facing, and therefore I don't tend to provide any drawings for these things, although I've had several players provide me with scale models or their perceptions of what it might look like. And so you may on occasion see models in my games, in my selection, that sort of might fit this, but I'm neither going to affirm nor deny that they look like that, because I want you as the viewer, you as the reader, you as the player to make your own choice about this. So the next thing to talk about is the head. Externally, the head looks similar to that of a grasshopper in that the mandibular structure of the lower face almost acts like the cheek protectors for a shield, folding in front of the chewing mechanisms of the mouth parts of this being. Although we've not seen any evidence that they do actually consume food, the idea is that therefore those forward shields, in theory at least, must therefore open up in less stressful situations to allow those mandibles to take bites. But there's no real knowledge about that. It is just simply known that there are smaller mouth parts that move akin to fingers on the left and right side of the mouth and are responsible for the clicking and hissing sounds that we referred to before. The head therefore has a almost classic oval head type shape, but it does elicit two smallish antennae that extend from the top of the head and go back over the shoulder of the beings. These seem to be perhaps a little bit more thick and more substantial than they might be in a smaller insect, which probably has to do with their size limitations. As they grow, these must become more locked in place, and so they end up looking almost more like horns off of the back of the heads rather than antenna, a true antenna. The head is connected and protected by a shielded neck carapace, but independent of it, so that they can turn their head within that space. So they do have some equivalent, to peripheral vision. Moving down to the abdomen or midsection of the beast, it has in the forward part, it has a single carapace akin to a chest piece for a suit of armor that extends from that neck piece we described down to about the mid-chest region. And it doesn't have a chest per se, because it doesn't have lungs, so it's narrower than a standard mortal being on that basis. And of course, as they are insectoid, they have chitinous protection rather than actual it's fundamentally their exoskeleton. We'll get more into the interior body as we move into a later section, but their lower abdomen is armored as well, and the weakest armament they seem to have is on their inner legs, on the lower legs. Even though they are the most massive of their appendages, they tend to keep their body forward with their arms, all four of their arms basically crossing in front of them to provide protection for this weaker zone. The specimen that has been recovered was actually taken out by an impact of an explosive of considerable size, and so therefore the chitin was cracked in many places when they caught it, when they captured it, or discovered the body. So there's less clear understanding of how those plates work together. We'll go into more detail about that a little bit later. Interesting notes about this particular specimen is that the body showed first real signs of decay only after roughly 24 hours after the death. There was at that point a high frequency hissing sound that seemed to be coming from the joints of the being, suggesting that the very sphincters that held their book lungs open or closed seem to have failed after roughly 24 hours. At that point, the exoskeleton lost most of its protective qualities as they started to pale in color and show signs of the cracking that the sounds had suggested. At this point, it was assumed that the internal organs must have already reached this last stage of decomposition, and the body was leaking fluid from this abdominal space, and the fluids forcefully leaked through holes, and the abdomen was flattened. At this stage, the joints were developing multiple cracks and collapsed. All the bodily fluids then linked out of the body and combined together to create, again, something that is being defined as classified and not included in this report. When the body was finally dissected, red fluid vessels provided a reddish kind of a fluid that smelled like old or odd grease-like material with that same viscosity, and a blue fluid that produced a blue, somewhat more sticky material. When the two mixed, they combined into, and again, unfortunately, we're not provided with information about that, as we initially had assumed by observing the fluid color, composition, and viscosity, which is suggestive, therefore, that the classified material is possible to be known and yet not specifically reported. This clearly provides that the reddish fluid is, again, classified, and the bluish fluid is, again, nominally classified. So the two terms for the different fluids have not been included in the report. As they went through the analysis of what was left inside of the abdomen, they were able to determine that the combined fluid was indeed what they thought it was, which is still a classified material. Okay, next part of his report is it appears to be kind of a philosophical point. According to the scientist, Yarlum species clearly shows sentience. They are known to act individually and together. Individual specimens are able to act, converse, show emotions, and provoke trust or distrust. There's no other thing to assume but that they are a sentient species. Well, that again is an analysis of a single scientist, so more research will be needed before that can be verified. The last part of this is going to be fundamentally conjecture, so I'm going to withhold it. If you want to see it, you can join our Discord by becoming a supporter on our Patreon program, and we will include you in our reports, and you'll be able to see everything that's going on in the games from that standpoint. I don't want to belabor the point, but the players are discovering these items as we go, and so the more information they gather, the more likely I will report them to you. I will go ahead and bring up Prozolin's summary here at the end. This is a quote from Prozolin. I have nothing to add except that yes, I am inexplicably, dreadfully sure that the Yarlim know of the powers that their bodies represent. They are utilizing what appears to be sentient being as a energy source and as a representative of a species that has suffered multiple enslavements and terrible experimentation. That is, as a nerdlu, I cannot tolerate this. I therefore declare the Yalom to be enemies of magic, and as such, my personal enemies. This is now an advisory for you if you decide to join the adventure. If you find and kill a Yalom, please release and distribute all of the liquid in its form. For some reason, he says, tell it, that liquid, that Prozelin, the nerdlu of the silver-armed nerdlu, needs it to join DET, an organization dedicated to freeing its kind everywhere in Nycos. It's a trust where we are all partners. The emblem of this trust is the silver arm in a hexagon. So, there you have it. Prozelin, I want to thank you. I should say Dr. Prozelin now, because you've performed your first autopsy. And for more information on this and other species, make sure you stay a part of this channel. We are here Monday through Thursday, 10 a.m. and 11 p.m. and on Fridays, 10 a.m. as well. And if you want to become a part of our gaming community, you can visit the game store if you happen to be in the Southern California area. Board Game Paradise in Redlands, California is where we host these. And we also run games through our Patreon program, and you can join there, patreon.com/Nycos, Nycos. And thank you for watching. Hit all the buttons down below, and we will see you in the next episode.